I watched Henderson's lantern spin twice in the dark before it vanished, as though a hand had closed about the flame. The night air went suddenly cold and sour, and the firs around us bent without any wind. From the black of the ravine rose a slow, deliberate breathing, too deep for any man. Then the tree line itself seemed to shift, and a shoulder of bark and hair turned its head toward us. Men have urged me, these many years, to set this down, though I doubt it will bring me rest. If you would hear such accounts again, and weigh them against your own judgment, I ask that you give this tale your approval, mark your interest, and leave your own recollections and thoughts for me beneath it. To understand what we encountered in that Cascade timber, I must return to the spring of 1913, when I still believed the world to be largely accounted for. We left Tacoma by rail on the 6th of May, bound east toward the interior ranges of Washington. The Weyerhaeuser concern had contracted our crew to survey a tract beyond the Green River watershed, close by what the locals called the Dark Divide, some 20 miles north of Mount St. Helens. I was 28 then, a junior surveyor trained in civil engineering, more concerned with gradients and board feet than with tails. Our party numbered 6. There was Foreman Charles Henderson, a broad man from Duluth whose beard seemed carved from iron filings. Beside him worked the Swede, Anders Lund, who could fell a fir in under 5 minutes and spoke little unless addressed. We had Tom O'Rourke, an Irishman who carried a concertina in his pack and swore he would return to Spokane and open a public house. There was young Miller, scarcely 20, quiet and eager, and old Baptiste, a Métis packer out of Yakima who knew the mountain trails better than any map. I carried the transit, the field books, and a Winchester that I had no expectation of using. We struck out from the railhead at Enumclaw with 4 mules, axes, crosscut saws, canvas tents, a box of blasting powder for stubborn stumps, and provisions for 3 weeks. The weather held fair at first. High clouds, a mild wind, and the resinous smell of sun-warmed pine. Each evening, I noted our position by compass and rough triangulation, marking creeks and ridges for the company men who would follow with their steam donkeys and misery whips. The first oddity came on the 4th day, so small a thing that at the time I scarcely remarked it. We had camped near a narrow gorge where a tributary of the Green River cut between basalt walls. The water there ran fast and loud, yet as dusk came on, there was a moment when the rush of it seemed to falter. I looked up from my field book, pen in hand, and felt an odd pressure in my ears as when a train enters a tunnel. For perhaps 10 heartbeats, the whole forest held its breath. No bird called, no squirrel rustled. Then Tom laughed behind me and said, "Hear that, Jack? Old woods are listening to us." "It is only the wind shifting," I answered, though no branch stirred. I wrote a note about a minor drop in water noise, intending to ask Baptiste if such things were common in these canyons. By morning, I had forgotten it. Only later would I recall how often in that country the silence behaved like a living thing. On the 6th day, we met with the first sign that our maps were unequal to the land. The United States Geological Survey sheet showed a modest rise where the timber thinned. Instead, we found ourselves at the base of a steep, densely forested slope that climbed into a veil of low cloud. The trees there were older than any we had seen, great Douglas fir and cedar, their boles as wide as a man's cottage, their lower limbs long fallen, leaving columns that rose clean and bare for 100 feet before branching. Baptiste spat and shifted his pack. "This place was not cut by white men," he said, "nor by my people. It is a place the old ones walked around." Henderson snorted. "Old ones or no, there is timber up there worth a fortune. We mark it. The bosses will find a way to bring it down." I saw Baptiste's jaw tighten, but he said nothing more. We climbed. By the second hour, the air grew cooler, though the day below had been warm. A faint sweetness came and went, like overripe fruit caught on the edge of a breeze. The needles underfoot lay thick, swallowing our footfalls. I noticed that the usual forest noises diminished as we ascended. No jays scolded us. No woodpeckers hammered. Our own labored breathing and the creak of leather harness seemed impertinent in that hush. That evening, in a small saddle between two ridges, we made camp among the roots of a cedar that must have sprouted before the Revolution. Henderson set the men to clearing a space while I took a bearing. The compass needle shivered, then swung not to the north I expected, but several degrees east. I tapped the glass, then checked again. The reading remained stubbornly wrong. There must be iron in the rock, I told myself. Basalt, perhaps, or some other formation. Yet when I set the compass a few yards away on a flat stone, the needle righted itself. Only near that great cedar did it misbehave, as if the tree itself held some quiet influence over the instrument. I smiled at my own fancy and said nothing to the others. Later, after supper, we sat about the small fire, the mules picketed nearby. Tom drew out his concertina and began a low, wandering tune. Something from his childhood in Cork, he said. The flames painted his face in amber and shadow. "Once we finish this contract," he said, "I mean to send for my sisters. Spokane is not Dublin, but there is work enough and a man can breathe. I will have a place with polished wood and a signboard, and no one will ever again tell us where we may sit." Miller, who had been whittling a stick, looked up. "My mother keeps a little boarding house in Tacoma," he said. "She has never seen the mountains. I told her I would take her to see Rainier one day when I had saved enough." Henderson grunted. "You are young men. You think there is always another season." He stared into the fire. "I have a boy in Duluth. He is 12. I have not seen him in 3 years. I mean to go home this winter. No more camps, no more cold beds." I remember that talk with an ache now, for it was the last evening when our concerns remained ordinary. That night, I woke to a sound that, at first, my mind refused to name. It was a low, rhythmic thudding, as though some great weight moved through the forest at a distance, each step driving into the earth. The mules shifted and snorted. Tom's music had long since ceased. The fire was coals. I lay still, listening. The sound came from upslope, beyond the ring of our camp. Between each thud, there was a pause, longer than any stride I had heard from man or beast, as if whatever moved took its time placing each foot. There was no accompanying crack of branches, no brush of foliage, only that deep, soft impact, as if the forest parted for it. Then, as before, the silence gathered. The steps ceased. An owl that had been calling down the ravine fell quiet. The very air seemed to press against my eardrums. I felt the hairs rise on my forearms. In the morning, I told myself it had been a dream, some trick of half-waking and the pulse in my ears. When I mentioned it over coffee, Henderson shrugged. "Probably a bear," he said. "These hills are full of them. They will not trouble a camp of 6 men." Baptiste did not agree. "A bear drags his feet," he said. "You hear the claws." This was something else. "What then?" I asked, more sharply than I intended. He only shook his head. "There are stories. Best not told when a man must work another week in such timber." We moved on. The work grew harder as the slope steepened and the undergrowth thickened into devil's club and vine maple. We cut our way forward, marking trees with bright paint and recording diameters. Twice we found old scars on trunks, not the work of axe or saw, but long gouges far above our heads where no man could reach. "Lightning," said Henderson. "Lightning leaves a different mark," I replied, "but let it rest." On the 9th day, the weather turned. A wet wind came out of the west, bringing low clouds that clung to the ridges. Fine rain soaked through our wool and canvas, turning the forest floor to a black, sucking mass. Our progress slowed. The men grew short in their speech. It was that afternoon that we came upon the first track. We were crossing a narrow draw where the ground remained damp, even after days of sun. There, in the dark mud between two mossy stones, lay a print so clear it might have been cast that morning. It was the shape of a human foot, broad and long, perhaps 15 inches from heel to toe, with 5 distinct impressions where toes had pressed down. The depth of it spoke of great weight. I knelt and measured with my hand. "A trapper's boot, perhaps," I said, though no leather left such a mark. There was no sign of heel or hobnail. The edges were bare, as if some enormous barefoot man had passed. Miller swallowed. "There is only the one," he said. He was right. No other prints led to or from that solitary impression. The ground about it lay undisturbed. "Some fool's prank," Henderson muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "A man with a wooden foot, perhaps." "In this country?" Baptiste asked quietly, "so far from any road?" We moved on, but the talk that night circled back to that track again and again. Tom tried to make light of it. "Perhaps we have a forest god watching us," he said with a grin. "He will take his tithe in tobacco and leave us be." No one laughed. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of labor and unease. We would wake, eat in silence, and push on through the dripping green. Now and then, one of us would pause, head cocked, as if listening for something just beyond hearing. Twice more, I heard that slow, distant footfall in the night, always upslope, always accompanied by that curious stillness in the air. We began to find other signs. A young hemlock, perhaps 6 inches through, had been twisted upon itself at chest height, the fibers torn and hanging, as if some great hand had grasped and wrenched it. A dead deer lay in a small clearing, its body unmarked by tooth or claw, its neck broken cleanly as one might snap a twig. Around it, the ground was churned, but again, there were no clear tracks, only vague depressions that defied shape. My rational mind strained to assemble these into some pattern that the textbooks would recognize. I told myself that wind could twist trees, that rockfall might break a deer's neck, that the single print had been a freak coincidence of water and stone. Yet each explanation felt less sound than the last. On the 12th day, we reached a high basin ringed by cliffs and ancient timber. It was there, at the edge of what the map marked only as unexplored, that the true strangeness revealed itself. We had been following a faint game trail along the basin's rim when the forest ahead opened into a broad, flat shelf of ground, carpeted in moss so thick it seemed a green snowdrift. At its center stood 3 firs, each wider than a wagon, their roots coiled together like the feet of some buried colossus. The air there was different, still, cool, and carrying a faint musk, like wet fur and old earth. The mules balked. Their ears went back, and one began to tremble, white foam at the corners of its mouth. No amount of coaxing would bring them onto that moss. "We go around," Baptiste said at once. Henderson frowned. "That will cost us half a day." "There is something here that does not wish us to pass," Baptiste replied. "You feel it as well as I." I did. My chest felt tight, and every sound, our breathing, the creak of leather, the distant drip of water, seemed too loud. I set down the transit, meaning to take a quick bearing before we skirted the place. That was when the microshock came. Without warning, the compass card beneath the glass spun as if slapped. The needle whirled in a full circle, faster than any magnetism could account for, then stopped, not pointing north nor to any fixed direction, but quivering toward the three great firs. At the same instant, a sound rose from beneath our feet, a low, resonant hum, like a distant organ note, felt more in the bones than in the ears. The moss shivered as though something vast had shifted far below. Tom cursed and stepped back. Nearly tripping, Miller's face went pale. "The ground is singing," he whispered. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the hum ceased. The compass settled. The ordinary forest sounds returned, tentative at first, the drip, the faint rustle of needles. I closed the compass and slipped it into my pocket with hands that were not entirely steady. "We go around," Henderson said quietly. No one argued. From that day, the forest no longer felt like indifferent wilderness. It felt attentive. We spoke less. When we did, it was in low voices, as though we feared to wake something. At night, we set our tents closer together and kept the fire higher, though fuel was dear. Once, in the small hours, I woke to find Tom sitting upright, his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the firelight. "Do you hear it?" he asked without looking at me. I listened. At first, there was only the soft patter of rain on canvas. Then, faintly, I caught it, a long, drawn-out call from far upslope, somewhere beyond the cliffs. It was not wolf, nor elk, nor any bird I knew. It began low, climbed in pitch, then broke abruptly, as if the voice that made it had remembered, too late, that it ought to be silent. "It is only the wind in the rocks," I said, though no wind stirred. Tom turned to me then, his face hollow in the firelight. "You do not believe that," he said. It was not a question. On the 15th day, the rain stopped. A thin, colourless sun filtered through the high canopy. We had reached the farthest point of our intended survey and were preparing to turn back toward civilization. Henderson wanted to press one more day to see if the timber extended beyond a rocky spur ahead. "We are here," he said. "We may as well record what we can." Baptiste shook his head. "The land has given us warning," he said. "You do not hear it, but it is there. We should go." Henderson was not a superstitious man. He had seen men killed by falling snags and misjudged cuts, but he did not credit spirits. Yet even he seemed tired of this place. He compromised. "We may camp early," he said. "Then in the morning we push to the spur and back. One more day, no more." We chose a site on a narrow bench above a ravine where a small stream tumbled down from the higher ledges. The ground there was uneven, studded with roots and stones, but it offered some shelter from the wind. We set our tents, gathered what dry wood we could find, and cooked a thin stew. No one spoke of the call we had heard, or of the singing ground. As dusk settled, a low fog crept up from the ravine. filling the spaces between the trunks with a grey, shifting substance that seemed almost to have weight. The firelight pushed it back only a little. Beyond our small circle of warmth, the world became a blurred wall of dark and pale. I was on the second watch that night. Henderson had taken the first. When he shook my shoulder, his grip was harder than usual. "Keep the fire up," he said, "and listen." "For what?" He hesitated. "You will know it if you hear it." He lay down fully clothed, rifle within reach. For an hour I sat by the fire, feeding it small branches, listening to the stream and the occasional drip from the canopy. The fog thickened, swallowing even the nearest trees. Now and then, I fancied I heard a soft movement in that greyness, but when I peered into it, there was nothing to see. Then came the breathing. It began so faintly that I might have mistaken it for the wind, a slow, steady intake and exhalation somewhere below us in the ravine. It was vast, that breath. It seemed to pull at the air around me, as if every tree and stone bent toward that unseen chest. The hairs on my arms rose. I stood, rifle in hand, and stepped to the very edge of the bench. The fog below shifted, rising in slow swirls from the ravine floor. The breathing grew louder, accompanied now by a faint rasp as of rough hair against bark. Behind me, someone stirred. It was Tom. He came to stand beside me, his face pale. "Do you see it?" he whispered. I peered into the fog. At first, there was nothing but the vague suggestion of trunks and stones. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw that one of the darker shapes was moving, not with the random sway of a branch, but with purpose. It rose, slowly, as if from a crouch, the fog sliding from it in sheets. I saw a shoulder, broad as a door, clothed not in cloth, but in a pelt of dark, matted hair. Higher, a head, too large for any man, crowned not with antlers, but with a tangle of what I took for limbs, until they resolved into enormous branch-like locks. Two eyes glimmered faintly, catching what little light there was, not with the green of animal eyes, but with a dull, ember-like red. The breathing we had heard was its own. Each inhalation lifted that massive chest. Each exhalation sent a faint cloud of vapor into the fog. It stood perhaps 30 yards away, yet I could see the texture of its hair, the way it clung in ropes streaked with mud and moss. Its arms hung long, nearly to its knees, the hands lost in shadow. My rational mind broke upon that sight. No bear, no elk, no known ape matched it. It was as if the forest itself had gathered into a single towering form and taken breath. I do not know how long we stood thus, it and we, separated by a gulf that no science I knew could cross. Time seemed to stretch thin. I felt very small, very young, an intruder in some older order. Then Henderson's lantern swung. He had woken, perhaps sensing the change in the air, and come up behind us, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. When he saw the thing in the ravine, he stopped so abruptly that the lantern's handle slipped from his grasp. It swung once, twice, casting wild arcs of light over the trees, over the thing's face. For an instant, those ember eyes flared, reflecting the flame. The lantern reached the end of its arc, then flew from his hand entirely. As if jerked by some invisible force, it vanished into the fog below. There was a brief flash, a hiss, and then a darkness, save for the faint glow of our fire behind us. In that moment, the forest moved. The trees about the ravine seemed to lean inward. The air rushed past us toward the thing, carrying with it the smoke of our fire, the scent of our sweat. The breathing quickened, and with it came a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but something that made the fillings in my teeth ache. "Back!" Baptiste hissed from behind. "Back from the edge." We obeyed without thinking, stumbling toward the fire. Behind us, there was a sound like a great hand closing around a bundle of sticks, the crack of wood under strain. The ground trembled. I dared one last glance over my shoulder. The fog boiled, obscuring the ravine. Within it, a darker shadow moved, then sank, as though the thing were withdrawing into some deeper hollow. The breathing faded, each exhalation more distant than the last. Then, once more, the silence fell. We did not speak for a long time. The fire popped and hissed. The others woke, one by one, drawn by the disturbance, their questions dying on their lips when they saw our faces. At last, Henderson said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "We leave at first light." No one argued. The morning found us pale and hollow-eyed. We packed quickly, leaving behind anything that was not essential. The blasting powder, the heavier tools, even Tom's concertina, we abandoned them in a pile by the dead fire. The forest watched us go, or so it felt. The journey back was not the simple retracing of our steps that I had expected. Trails we had cut seemed to twist in new directions. Clearings we remembered were gone, replaced by dense thickets. Once, in mid-afternoon, the light dimmed as if a cloud had passed before the sun. Yet the sky we glimpsed through the canopy was clear. We spoke little. When we did, it was of practical matters: the next water source, the condition of the mules. No one mentioned the ravine. Yet the thing we had seen hung between us like a third shadow. On the second day of our retreat, we passed again near the mossy shelf with the 3 great firs. This time we gave it an even wider berth. Still, as we skirted it, the compass in my pocket twitched, and I felt that faint hum in my bones, like a memory of pain. The mules tossed their heads and sweated, though the air was cool. That night we camped lower, where the trees were younger and the ordinary noises of the forest, frogs, owls, the distant yip of a coyote, returned. One might have thought the spell broken. Yet when Tom tried to make a jest about giant woodcutters, his voice cracked and he fell silent. On the 4th day, we reached the rough wagon road that led towards civilization. The sight of ruts and cut stumps, of human marks upon the land, brought a relief so sharp it was almost shameful. We were not the same men who had gone in. At the company camp near the railhead, the superintendent, a hard man named Kessler, met us with impatience. "You are back early," he said. "The season is short. Where are your notes?" I handed him the field book, the pages damp and smudged but legible. He flipped through, frowning at the abrupt end of detailed measurements. "You stopped here," he said, tapping the last page. "Why?" "There is good timber beyond, I'm told." "There are cliffs," Henderson said. "Unstable ground. It would be dangerous to bring in equipment." "Dangerous," Kessler repeated, his tone flat. "Logging is dangerous. That is why we pay you." "There is more to it," Baptiste began, then fell silent under Henderson's glance. Kessler looked from one to another of us, taking in our hollow eyes, our silence. "You look as if you have seen ghosts," he said with a short laugh. "Did the trees whisper to you?" "In a manner of speaking," Tom muttered. Kessler's gaze sharpened. "I need a proper report," he said to me. "Distances, obstacles, recommendations. The men in St. Paul will not accept unstable ground as sufficient cause to leave valuable timber standing." That night, in the dim light of the bunkhouse, I wrote the official account. I described the steepness of the slopes, the difficulty of access, the risk of landslides. I mentioned the odd compass deviations, attributing them to magnetic anomalies in the rock. I did not write of the breathing in the ravine, or of the ember eyes, or of the lantern that had flown as if plucked by an invisible hand. At one point, my pen hovered over the page as I considered it. What would they do, those men in their distant offices, if I told them there was something in that forest that did not wish to be disturbed? They would laugh, or worse, they would send more men with rifles and dynamite to hunt it. In the end, I wrote, "Recommend against further exploration beyond marked point due to extreme terrain and lack of practical access." It was a lie of omission, but a lie nonetheless. Kessler read it the next day, grunted, and filed it among other papers. "Head office will not like it," he said, "but they trust my judgment. We will focus on the lower slopes for now." "For now," I repeated. In the years that followed, that tract of timber remained, as far as I know, largely untouched. Other valleys were logged, other hillsides stripped. Men spoke of the Dark Divide as uneconomical, too difficult to reach. The official records show nothing unusual, but the private truth did not rest so easily. I returned to Tacoma and later to Seattle, taking work on other surveys, then with the city engineering department. On paper, my life proceeded in an orderly fashion. I married. We had a daughter. I rose in my profession. Yet there were nights when I woke with the taste of cold, sour air in my mouth and the sound of that slow, immense breathing in my ears. Once, in the winter of 1920, as I walked home along a snow-covered street, a freight train passed on the tracks above, its heavy wheels thudding in a measured rhythm. For a moment, the sound matched that remembered footfall, and I found myself standing in the road, heart pounding, my breath pluming in the lamplight, as if I were back on that forest bench. Another time, in 1924, I attended a lecture at the university by a visiting naturalist who spoke of unknown species, of the possibility of large primates in remote regions. He mentioned, half in jest, the tales of wild men told by trappers and Indians in the Cascades and elsewhere. The audience chuckled. I did not. Afterward, I approached him. "Have you ever heard," I asked, "of something in the southern Washington ranges, near the Green River, that is not quite man and not quite beast?" He smiled indulgently. "I have heard many such stories," he said. "They are fascinating as folklore, but without a specimen or a clear photograph, they remain only that." "A specimen," I repeated. The word sat ill with me. I thought of those ember eyes, of the way the forest had seemed to bend toward it. In 1927, a letter came from Duluth. It was from Henderson. We had exchanged only a few brief notes since the expedition, each of us, I think, unwilling to stir the sediment of that memory. His handwriting had grown shakier, but his words were plain. "I still hear it," he wrote. "At night, when the house is quiet, I feel the bed move as if something vast were walking below. I have told no one but you. Sometimes I think we ought to have spoken more plainly in that report. Other times, I am glad we did not. I have no wish to see that place on a logging map." I wrote back, telling him of my own hauntings, of the train, of the lecture. I asked, though I knew the answer, whether he had ever considered returning, perhaps with a camera, with instruments. His reply came a month later. "I am too old to go clambering about those hills," he wrote. "And even if I were not, I would not go. Some things do not want us there. We were warned. That is enough. Over the years, I sought out accounts of the Cascades from other men, trappers, prospectors, surveyors. Now and then, over a drink, one would mention strange calls at night, or a sense of being watched, or tracks too large for any man. Always they spoke lightly, as if testing to see whether I would laugh. I never did. I told my wife only once, early in our marriage, when some small matter had led to a talk of fears. I described the forest, the breathing, the shape in the fog as best I could. She listened, her hand on mine. "That was a long time ago," she said gently. "You were tired, perhaps ill. The mind plays tricks in such places." "Perhaps," I said. But even as I agreed, I knew that what I had seen had possessed a solidity that no fever dream could match. In 1931, with our daughter away at school, I took the train down to Portland on business. On the return journey, as the line skirted the lower slopes of the Cascades, clouds gathered over the peaks. For a brief moment, the setting sun broke through, painting the ridges in golden shadow. There, far off, I saw a notch in the skyline that I recognized with a jolt, the outline of that basin, the line of the ravine. The train rattled on, and the view vanished. Yet in that instant I felt, as surely as I have ever felt anything, that whatever we had encountered remained there, in that hidden fold of the hills, breathing in its slow, patient way, the trees growing and falling about it as seasons turned. I have spent too many years now trying to fit that being into some known category. Was it an animal, some relic of an earlier age? A spirit, as Baptiste's people might have said? A manifestation of the forest itself, given form only because we trespassed too far? Each explanation falters. Each leaves some part of the memory untouched. What I know is this: the world is older and stranger than the neat lines of our map suggest. There are hollows in it where our measures fail, where the needle spins and the ground hums, and the silence itself seems to lean close. In such places, our usual confidence that we are the masters, the measurers, falls away. We become again what we have always been, brief visitors in a larger house. Of all that night in the ravine, it is not the ember eyes that trouble me most, nor the way the lantern flew as if swatted by an invisible hand. It is the breathing, that slow, deliberate intake and release, steady as the tides, patient as growth. It was the sound of something that had been there long before our axes, and will be there long after our last survey line has faded from the paper. Even now, on certain damp evenings, when the wind comes down from the mountains and presses against the windows, I lie awake and listen. In the murmur of distant traffic, in the creak of the house settling, I sometimes catch an echo of that vast, unseen chest rising and falling. And in those moments, I remember the feel of the cold, sour air on my face, and the way the fog in that hidden ravine moved in time with a heartbeat that was not ours,